Our second technical session is on impactful CSR towards strengthening CSR. May I request the moderator, Dr. Garima Dadij, along with her panel, Madam Anita Shah Akila, who will be chairing this session, with Mrs. Namita Vikas, Dr. Indrajit Singh, Mr. Sarabjit Sahota, Dr. Suranjali Tandon, and Ms. Neetu Ahuja from Axis Bank. May I request you all to kindly join. We are starting our second technical session. Madam Neetu Ahuja, you are requested to kindly come on the dais, please. The panel discussion is on impactful CSR towards strengthening ESG. Over to you, Dr. Garima.
So very good afternoon. Post-lunch session is always a most challenging one, but let me assure you that it will be most interesting as well. Let us begin with a brief introduction of the esteemed panel members we have today. We have today with us chairing the panel, Ms. Anita Shah. Madam is a Joint Secretary, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, a member of Elite Indian Audit and Account Service, experienced financial advisor with a demonstrated history of working in the government finance sector. Thank you for agreeing, ma'am, for chairing this session. We also have with us virtually Ms. Nainalal Kidwai, a well-known personality in ESG. She is a chartered accountant by profession and an Indian banker and business executive. She is leading a lot of ESG initiatives, and she is the first Indian woman to graduate from Harvard Business School. So we will be hearing her virtually through a message. We have with us Ms. Namita Vikas, founder and managing director of Octus ESG. She's a very senior business leader with 30 years of diverse global experience in climate strategy and sustainability across sectors, including banking, technology, and FMCG, with a specific focus on sustainable climate and green finance, climate action, ESG, and climate risk management. She was instrumental in launching a number of green and sustainable wholesale and retail financial products, and has contributed to raising over $1 billion as capital and credit lines. Under her able guidance, the first ever Green Bond of India was issued in 2015, and accreditation was awarded from Green Climate Fund known as GCF. She founded Octus ESG in 2020, a global expert advisory on sustainable finance and ESG, which was awarded India's SME Leadership Champion by UN Women 2021 Asia Pacific. Welcome you, ma'am. We also have with us Dr. Sarabjit, who's working at UNICEF as a disaster risk reduction specialist. He's an architect and urban planner with over 25 years of professional experience of steering development and humanitarian strategies and programs within UNICEF and other frontline humanitarian agencies. He has worked in the domain of risk-informed development planning, humanitarian response, urban planning and design. In recognition of his contribution to policy planning and implementation of disaster risk reduction and humanitarian programming. In 2005, he was included in International Visitor Leadership Program by Department of State, Government of USA. We welcome you, Dr. Sarabjit. We also have an academician with us, along with me, Dr. Suranjali Tandon. She's a faculty at NIPFP. She has published widely on topics in international taxation. She's a special invitee to the Task Force on Sustainable Finance India and is an expert invitee to IFSCA's, that's a subcommittee on sustainable finance related disclosures. She has worked in the past on many projects with the Ministry of Finance on key policy issues. She currently leads the Institute's work on sustainable finance and international taxation. Welcome you, Dr. Tandon. So at the outset, we will just begin with the message from Ms. Nainalal Kidwai. May I request IT to please play that?
Volume. That needs focus going forward. The whole area of ESG, and we all recognize that CSR is a part of ESG, but important to understand that ESG is much bigger than CSR as we have understood it, and indeed have great examples of, I'm sure, from many of you companies that are present today. But how can you grow that CSR experience to be far more all-encompassing, to be what ESG requires, is what I will address today. So there was a new study out just as recently as May 15th this year. And the study was provided by IBM, and it gives evidence that CEOs, and this global CEOs, some 3,000 of which were included in this study. And some of the highlights there suggest that almost half of the CEOs cited sustainability as one of the highest priorities for their organization in the next 2 to 3 years, which was up from just a third of CEOs last year. So we are seeing a huge embracing of ESG and a big jump up from year to year. And more than half cited sustainability as their greatest challenge in the next 2 or 3 years. So they all recognize something needs to be done, but it's also a challenge to get there. And that, more than half that are saying sustainability is the greatest challenge, is up from just 32% last year. And it puts it ahead of the other challenges: regulation, which was at 50%, cyber at 45%, and supply chain disruptions at 38%. So ESG was right up there, higher than any other challenge as seen by global CEOs this year. The CEOs say the greatest pressure for sustainability, where is it coming from? From board members, 72%, followed by investors, 57%, ecosystem partners, 49%, regulators, 49%, and government, 46%. So all the stakeholders are there in at least that half, 50% level, but there is pressure coming primarily from the boards and investors in the ESG compliances that are being required of companies now. And then there's a new UN panel devoted to simplifying net zero emission standards for businesses. And it's been put there partly to fight greenwashing, where stakeholders from ESG and analysts, investment bankers, academic researchers, investor advocates say a solid set of recommendations from the panel could mean more disciplined net zero forecasts and trackable metrics. So pressure now on bodies like the UN and many regulators to come up with very comprehensive numbers so that companies cannot just get away with talking of commitments of 2050, but have to be far more specific in the way they are looking at this. So this trend is here to stay. Companies have embraced it. And indeed, regulators are not far behind in making sure it happens. And just in case, you're wondering, is it just the fact that stakeholder capitalism is woke? There is this issue that no, this is really just one of those things that is happening right now and it will die. In fact, Larry Fink of BlackRock says, and he does this in his annual letter this year, which I would suggest is worth reading. He says that the concept is not a social or ideological agenda. We focus on sustainability not because we're environmentalists, but because we are capitalists and fiduciaries to our clients. So the way we have to view ourselves as players, as corporates, as investors, is to understand our role as fiduciaries for our clients and as capitalists. And therefore, this decarbonization imperative, the shift towards a low carbon economy, which is underway, will begin to look at hard to abate industries, both from technical and business model gaps, as the decarbonization plans of whole sectors become critical for the very survival of the sector. So we in India, companies operating here have to recognize these global trends that are here to stay. And the challenge for us now is to ensure that we become very much part of that journey, indeed, maybe even lead in that journey. Now, these ESG discussions actually started to gather pace in 2018, where climate change became very much embraced as an issue across the globe. And 2019 is generally considered as the inflection point where investments made a record flow into ESG, and 2020 was likely actually to see even more of this intensification in this decade going forward. So whether it's governments, investors, employees, vendors, communities, everyone now is looking at ESG parameters going forward. The social and governance factors, of course, remain critical. So there's no two ways about it. What we call CSR, and in particular the social aspect, which fits into the ESG definition, the way an organization handles itself in a crisis like the COVID-19 scenario was all a test of how we engage with society and also, frankly, a test of governance. The health, safety of employees was paramount, and these all play a part in the way we as companies embrace ESG. Inclusion is another aspect. And then when millions are out of work, there is obviously scrutiny around how we engage with our employees, how did we deal with excess staff, how have we compensated people through these periods. So what we have done will all become a measure of how we have done, not just in terms of CSR, but also how we deal with our employees and society around us through crises such as these. Uh, the European Commission actually has an action plan on sustainable finance, which is an indication of some of the major regulatory changes which are on the way. And the action plan of the European Commission is around reorienting capital flows towards sustainable investment. And the purpose there is, of course, to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth. So if you're a listed company on the stock market, you're likely to feel the impact of some of what is being laid out by the European Commission. And the other purpose of the European Commission is to manage financial risks stemming from climate change, which could be because of resource depletion, water, energy, etc., environmental degradation, and social issues. So these are some of the very important factors driving change, which become important for us to therefore understand that these are permanent, they're here to stay, and they are going to come through in terms of the regulation, like climate risk. And so, we are at a point where in India, the Reserve Bank of India is also looking at all of this. It's in fact issued its first circular on banking and sustainable development way back in 2007, which encouraged adoption of best practice and greater transparency. And as we look at things going forward, there's a launch of national voluntary guidelines for responsible financing from the IBA, which came in 2015, which has the key specific guidelines. So now the banks are requiring this of companies: ethical conduct and environmental and social governance, integration of ENS risk management in business activities, minimizing environmental footprint in internal operations, environmentally friendly products, services, and investment, enabling inclusive human and social development, stakeholder engagement, commitment to human rights, disclosure. So very wide ranging and going all the way back to the supply chain, employees, and how we engage with communities. And the priority sector lending targets that Reserve Bank of India has had for a long time sees inclusion of social infrastructure and decentralized renewable energy within priority sector lending. So India too has continued to embrace what is important and is moving on that journey. And then at SEBI, we have again seen some of these guidelines coming forward, which are important as we go forward. We saw initially the green bond market seeing, and you are here at a very important forum where IICA has played a key role. And some of the thinking guidelines that you will see coming from the IICA are indeed exactly what we require. Some convening of what different regulators require: SEBI, RBI, the IICA, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and combining of that in a way that we as companies can make sense of it. Will have to begin at the school stage. Curriculums will need to be bolstered with courses that enable generations to understand sustainability in their daily lives, to seek accountability from companies they are buying from, demanding improvements, and develop a more values-driven approach. But on the other, we as companies have to set the stage and indeed play in what is a very important agenda.
Thank you very much to Naina ma'am for virtually joining and sending this message. Because of the paucity of time, we have to quickly move. And let me just I missed, so let me just welcome Neetu Ahuja, a managing partner with Axis Burgundy Private in her last assignment with Kotak Mahindra Bank Limited. She was Senior Vice President, Regional Head, Public Affairs and Government Business, having over 20 years of working experience across banking and financial service sector with global and national financial institutions. So welcome you, ma'am. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we know, and as spoken by Naina ma'am also, that ESG is no more a social and ideological agenda. It's no more a tick box approach. And there is acute pressure from boards and investors and other stakeholders on ESG. We are having this discussion today. So with this, I request the session chair, Madam Anita Shah, to kindly address the panel.
Thank you, Garima, dignitaries on the dais, and my colleagues and friends of the dais. Corporate culture has never been more transparent or important than it is now. Sustainability leaders, investors, employees, and consumers are choosing companies that align with their values. Corporate social responsibility and environment social governance policies guide business practices, inform the public about the values, goals, and risk of a company. Corporate social responsibility covers the overarching social, environmental, and economic concerns in a company's policies, practices, and decision making. CSR commitments serve as keystone for corporate culture, give the employees, investors, and consumers an insight into the company values. Through CSR is about accountability mainly. The qualitative nature of CSR makes it very difficult to pin it down to what exactly is being done. The will, the values, the spirit of corporate culture can be captured by CSR, which serves at best as a starting point to get to the next step of measurable data driven change. Herein comes in ESG, which uses the environmental, social, and governance factors to evaluate sustainability practices within a company. While CSR aims to make a business accountable, ESG criteria makes such businesses' efforts measurable. ESG criteria focuses on the quantitative results that help the investors make better decisions about the risk and the ethics of a particular company. The reporting also helps the consumers to decide which business to support and which not by giving them an indication if or what a company's practices and actions align with their own values. ESG metrics have quantitative performance indicators aligned to the particular ESG criteria. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs for more than a decade has nudged the companies to be socially responsible and ethically responsible in their operation. We had in 2009 the voluntary guidelines on corporate social responsibility. This was the first step towards mainstreaming the concept of business responsibilities. Then thereafter it was further refined by having a national voluntary guidelines on social, environmental and economic responsibilities of business in 2011, which was essentially a set of 9 principles that offered Indian businesses an understanding and approach to inculcate responsible business conduct. Principle 7 of this NVGs was of inclusive and equitable growth, which focused on encouraging business action on national development priorities, including community development initiatives and strategic CSR based on shared value concept. This principle of NVG was subsequently translated into a mandatory provision of the corporate social responsibility under Section 135 of the Companies Act of 2013. India was the first country to introduce mandatory CSR for a certain class of companies. The Companies Act provided a statutory framework to engage the corporates as partners in social development by leveraging their managerial efficiency, best practices, technology and innovation in the delivery of public goods and services. Now, where does CSR and ESG, where do they converge? CSR architecture as it exists is currently within the Companies Act, is currently focused on mandating the companies to spend a certain percentage of their profit in furtherance of the socio-economic development of the country. The CSR is therefore just a subset of the ESG, which has introduced a paradigm shift in the way businesses operate and interact with the shareholders. ESG compliance focuses on making the businesses more responsible and accountable for their own actions. The philosophy of business has now changed from shareholders to stakeholder model of governance, and the companies have to align their business strategies along the triple bottom line approach, which gives importance to people, planet, as well as profit. CSR is thus considered as the precursor of ESG. CSR is a form of self-regulation, ensuring a company's actions have positive impact on the environment, communities, and the public sphere. ESG, on the other hand, takes on the CSR and builds on it in a manner that takes it out from the realms of pure philanthropy to a concrete set of numbers which can be used by investors and consumers alike in understanding a company's philanthropic, social, and internal governance practices. In other words, CSR aims to make a business accountable. ESG criteria make such businesses' efforts more measurable. There is a need to strengthen ESG. The current and emerging challenges which are facing humanity, such as COVID-19, climate change, scarcity of resources, and growing inequalities, have taught us that an interdependent world can only survive and thrive if everyone behaves responsibly and is accountable to each other for their actions. with several global companies being larger than even some nation states in terms of their turnover, the responsibility of businesses to their stakeholders will only increase in the coming years. COVID-19 has reaffirmed that the business has to be inclusive and sustainable. It has provided us an opportunity to revisit our relationship with the nature. It has taught us many lessons to reorient our strategy, not to remain in silos, to become resilient, to act responsibly, and to become inclusive and sustainable. Hence, companies are not required only to grow in an inclusive and sustainable manner, but they also are required to address the concerns of different stakeholders and changing their business philosophy. Businesses are measured as worthy on basis on how they function in the best interest of the company, its employees and shareholders, the community, and for the protection of the environment. This has been incisively captured in the section 166 of the Companies Act 2013, wherein the fiduciary duties have been cast upon the directors of the company. Through what we end up seeing in the year that is 2022, corporate boards and government leaders will face rising pressure to demonstrate that they are adequately equipped to understand and oversee the ESG issues, right from climate change to human rights to social unrest. The broadened scope of the corporate board responsibilities also requires more focus and time commitment from the board members to meet their duties. Pressure on boards to shore up their ESG credentials is set to grow as investors demand better accountability from the top and heightened focus on sustainability. In addition, efforts to diversify the board create policies that foster meaningful diversity, equity, and inclusion will continue to evolve from a box-ticking approach to a holistic appreciation of how differences in identity, expertise, and leadership styles can drive growth and innovation. There would be three guiding principles that I would like to highlight, that as regulators and standard setters are standing at the crossroads of convergence and fragmentation, we believe that adopting a few key principles could help forge a shared path towards better informed investment decisions. One, require quantitative metrics to be disclosed, not qualitative explanations which may devolve into a boilerplate language. Second, specify disclosures of raw data such as number of employees, tons of emissions, location of facilities, not outputs in terms of percentages which are likely to be consistently calculated and hence may not be comparable. Third, impose minimum mandatory core disclosures across a broad range of participants beyond public companies to avoid inconsistent set of rules. These principles would enable comparability and accountability and a level playing field across all markets. The quality and the quantity of ESG data will continue to improve as the reporting requirements grow. Regulators around the world are now addressing the lack of clear definitions, standardized data. In Europe, we've got the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, that is the SFDR, which has brought about mandatory ESG disclosure obligation. And the EU taxonomy sets out a list of environmentally sustainable economic activities. The new global ESG related standards will continue to evolve throughout the year and onward. The global standard setting bodies such as the newly formed International Sustainability Standards Board can help address what may be the largest obstacle to accountability, that is the lack of a common baseline for disclosure standards consistent across jurisdictions and industries. To date, the agreement on key metrics and reporting framework for environmental factors has crystallized more rapidly than it has for social factors. But 2022 could bring about an increasing convergence on the data, metrics, and the reporting and requirements most relevant to the social issues, alongside rising pressure to ensure that these metrics measure impact and not just inputs. The steps taken by India, I would outline the steps taken by India to strengthen the ESG responsible business practices. There has been an increasing recognition of ESG's role. Therefore, 2007, the then Planning Commission had adopted an inclusive growth approach as a part of the 11th five-year plan. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs has been taking a number of initiatives towards this responsible business conduct. There were requisite guidelines such as the National Voluntary Guidelines on Social, Environmental and Economic Responsibilities, and thereafter the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct, which was in 2018. It has prescribed measurable non-financing report frameworks such as business responsibility reporting, business responsibility and sustainability report, and has also prepared a national action plan on business and human rights as per the United Nations guiding principles. As per the BRSR framework, the companies are required to make disclosures on environment, social and governance parameters. Recently, SEBI has mandated 1,000 top listed companies by market capitalization to submit BRSR on a voluntary basis from 2021-22 financial year and on mandatory basis from 22-23. BRSR is intended to have a quantitative and standardized disclosure on the ESG parameters to ensure comparability across companies, sectors and time. Such disclosures will be helpful for investors to make better investment decisions. Now I'll come to the emerging trends which we are able to look at in 2022 and beyond. Climate would be as first amongst equals. Climate is eclipsing governance and social issues at the top of the ESG agenda, reflecting both the existential threat of global temperature rise and the race against time to rein it in. We are looking at a net zero supply chain. We are looking at a model which is cradle to cradle model, that is, which is focusing on the 4 R's, that is of refuse, reduce, reuse and recycle. There is no planet B. We need to finance climate change. There will be no escaping the fact that we require finances for projects that help us adapt to a changing climate. As government and supranationals issue bonds to pay for them, they could drive a large-scale expansion of market for green bonds. Green bonds raise proceeds explicitly designated for environmental projects. Historically, most of the bonds for climate change were mainly looking at curbing of emissions, reducing the carbon footprint. However, it was not to adapt to the extreme weather. That's beginning to change. First, sovereigns and supranationals have now begun to outpace corporate issuers with larger green bond issuance values. And also, the new sovereign green bonds which are eligible for index also include climate change adaptation projects such as ranging from flood mitigation to improvements in climate modeling capacities. This highlights the need for circular economy solutions, resilient and renewable energy sources, as well as green buildings, more sustainable transport networks across the continent. To conclude, I would say the philosophy behind ESG criteria is to recognize the effect companies have on the environment and the society as a whole. CSR is one of the ways in which the companies can contribute to the welfare of the society. However, fulfilling CSR obligations by itself is not enough. With the global pandemic, climate change, continual depletion of natural resources, and various instances of fraud and scams, investors have now woken up to the reality of how ESG factors of a business entity could have an impact on its long-term financial performance. Thus, there is a growing interest in the ESG integration in the investment decision-making process across the world. The adoption of the SDGs, that is the Sustainable Development Goals, has emphasized the importance of promoting more long-term investment. A significant portion of this investment is expected to come from the private entities and private investors. And this is where the investment-based ESG framework comes into the picture. Despite the fact that the ESG investments are still in their infancy in India, they are gaining appeal. Recent policy pushes have strengthened the country's quest for climate-friendly initiatives and a focus on private sector involvement in green energy. Even the Government of India's Economic Survey of 2021 has acknowledged the need to integrate climate and finance policy and outlined a number of measures that are boosting ESG investment in India. To conclude, given India's developmental aspirations, incorporating ESG factors into investment decision-making business processes is becoming more increasingly important in order to solve the lingering socio-economic issues as well as rising environmental and climate risks that are being faced by the country.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for providing 360-degree understanding of ESG, be it the trends, emerging challenges, and even way forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have ESG stalwarts sitting here, only the time is less. So, moving directly to Ms. Namita, and, asking some very relevant questions such as that ESG has emerged to the forefront very quickly, and we all are recognizing that. So what are the trends that are shaping its future and its potential impact on companies?
Thank you very much, Garima, and it's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Uh, hearing Naina and hearing Anita, I think it's very important to understand that finance has played a big role in setting the trend as far as ESG is concerned. It's not that we were not talking about ESG or environment and social parameters from different lenses, but I think the fact that today finance is asking those questions, I think that has led to many come to the table. So from infant to early to almost becoming mainstream. And if you look at the current situation globally, about 53% year-on-year growth in ESG assets has happened. The market is at about 2.7 trillion US dollars just for 2021. We've seen many issuances in India also. And the rise is with investors, portfolio managers, sell-side analysts heavily engaging on ESG. In India also, we saw 2020 about 7 ESG equity funds being launched, and the AUM of these funds has risen to 4.7 times in the last 2 years to over 1.5 billion US dollars. So there is a lot of demand that has got created, and when demand gets created, naturally there's supply that will come, right? I think there are a few things that need to be looked at from the force behind all of this. One is, this new sustainable finance and ESG related guidelines, principles, standards, regulations that have come world over. Naturally, the cascading effect is happening across markets. Investors are coming together, institutional investors, the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, and many such alliances that have come together, especially at COP26, where the future growth is being oriented towards low carbon economy. And therefore, investors, multilaterals, bilateral funds will need or maybe even force companies, financial institutions to look at ESG at the base level. So that's really one of the first aspects. The second is increased awareness and rise in demand for climate-friendly finance as well as non-financial products. I think that's an important point. So strong product development with over 266 new sustainable funds have been launched just in the Q4 of 2021. And asset managers are continuing to repurpose, rebrand conventional products into sustainable offerings. We've seen how regulations are pushing the agenda, right? I mean, our own BRSR, which is mandating disclosures on material ESG risks and opportunities, the financial implications, and the approach to mitigate and adapt these risks. I think that is a very important point, and that was a big breakthrough as far as this disclosure standard was concerned. And what would it do? It would really enable investors, banks, intermediaries assess the data on ESG and climate related issues as far as its borrowers are concerned. So greenwashing to a large degree would be very much limited, right? So like I said, the rippling effect, and there's also a lot of pressure from peers. So everybody is taking commitments. Everybody has gone around COP26 saying, I want to be net zero, I want to be, decarbonize my portfolio. So there is a rising pressure in the market where when you go for capital raising, naturally there are only these many green funds that are looking, and they're looking at specific disclosures by companies. There is high return on investments for financial institutions that have looked at, I mean, we know that ESG funds, I mean, those companies that focus on ESG have been performing very well on stock markets, right? Better governance, better brand image. I think all of this is pushing the envelope. What we need is a very robust, forward-looking approach uh, on assets, bringing as far as not only companies are concerned, but also their supply chains, because that impact will happen across the board, right? Thank you.
So, ma'am, how do you see, I mean, you say companies need to do for preparing for such situation is disclosure, or is there any further suggestion to, see for the future of ESG?
I think that's a very important question, because I said that without ESG, non-financial data, without the non-financial data, investors are not moving, right? And I think what the what has started to happen is we're looking at ESG from a risk standpoint, but I think it's important to look at ESG from a opportunity standpoint. So when the green bond market was very nascent, and we figured in India we could look at issuing a green bond from a ESG opportunity perspective, and that's how the green bond was issued. I was reading only yesterday a very interesting McKinsey quarterly, and I would recommend everybody to pick it up. It has spoken about, and to answer your question, how is ESG facilitating the top line growth? I think that's important. How is it reducing costs? Because ultimately, towards environment, resource efficiency needs to be brought down, right? Carbon footprint needs to be brought down. So therefore, how do you look at, then there's a direct correlation as far as costs are concerned, right? Minimizing regulatory and legal interventions. I think this is very critical, because we see how many closures on aspects of ESG, or how many license being pulled back because of certain environment or social or governance related issues, and then the legal battles that get companies get involved. Then increasing employee productivity. I think that's important, and that these days there are many employees who are looking at how companies place ESG, and they make the decisions. I mean, that has become a very interesting decision criteria. And then, optimizing investments and capital expenditures. I mean, investing today in a sustainable plant, looking at all the aspects, is going to, in the long run, deliver on better returns on that investment, right? So I think these are some of the aspects that need to be looked at with that.
I mean, though we have less time, but again, this very important thing. What are some of the issues that are disrupting ESG and the practices that are working well?
Yeah, see, at the larger level, one is there is no universal, uniform definition of ESG, right? I mean, there are different definitions, and therefore there are gaps. So while there are disclosure standards that are coming up, the EU taxonomy, it's a classification system which is establishing clearly what is environmentally friendly and what is sustainable. I think that becomes as a big gap. Then there are multiple ESG reporting frameworks and rating models. One big thing is good that SEBI has taken a stand on ESG rating agencies who need to be accredited. I think that's going to bring in some kind of market standardization. Then the third point is the understanding of ESG is also quite nascent. While there are those who are converted, like many of us who are here, but there are many out there who are not converted. What is the ROI? Why should I take up ESG? I think these are very important aspects to look at. And Anita very eloquently mentioned about how ESG is measurable. I think that's an important aspect. And in that sense, ESG differs because it is not only measurable, but it is typically built on quantitative and semi-quantitative data that really relays a company's or an organization's exposure to long-term ESG parameters, right? So these are some of the aspects that are there. While having said that, there are good practices. Risk assessment is strengthening at institutional levels, at organization levels. Greenwashing, as I said, can no longer be an option, especially as a tight rein on products and mandated disclosures is instituted. I mean, US regulators, UK regulators, across the market, there are about 30 regulators who are looking at how do you do away with greenwashing by coming up with classifications, right? So I think all this so while there are challenges, there are very good opportunities that are sitting there, and there are companies who are wanting to contribute towards that larger sustainable agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So quickly moving, relating while discussing what worked and what did not work for ESG, I would like to now go to Ms. Neetu Ahuja and asking about, the financial outlook of ESG. As we know that, CSR, there is a law of 2%, but how do you ultimately get finance for ESG? That's what companies are concerned about. So your views on that.
Sure. Uh, Good afternoon, everyone, my fellow panelists. ESG is a new topic, like Namita ji just mentioned, that there's a lot of inflow of money which is already starting to come from global side. Just to take a number, last year $210 billion were raised, especially for ESG, out of which a partial amount of money has come into India. So if as a country, we are looking to grow from international capital, which today seems to be a challenge for a country like ours, we need to focus our efforts both at the country level as well as the corporate level towards ESG norms. While there is a SEBI paper which has come, and there are norms which are there already about what companies can do, but globally, if we look at the trends, most of the technology companies are becoming bigger, which gives us an indication that these technology companies with revenues larger than some of the countries would eventually be gearing up the growth globally. So if that happens, technology companies and other companies also would become more responsible towards ESG, and therefore capital flows monitoring would be one partial part of the government job in terms of getting growth capital for them. So just to put in perspective, there was a point made by my panelist that Europe is doing some kind of different balance sheet items which we can replicate in India. So for example, CAPEX, which is related to ESG, can be given tax incentives, which is not being spoken about at this point of time. Anything which relates to CSR is already taken as a tax stop because 2% is there. But as of now, in India, there is nothing on the ESG side. So this is something which we can consider. Apart from that, what is most important today, that anything which has changed ever in the society, it has always happened through finance. Finance is responsible for changing the habits of every individual country and citizens put together. So if that needs to happen, it has to become a fashionable necessity. Are the citizens taking responsibility towards green economy? Is there a moral responsibility that companies are having, and it's not just greenwashing? So all of this can come and happen through the source of finance.
Thank you, Sneetu. Moving, just to ask, that, so how do you feel that, that corporates needs to do to navigate the ESG scenario? Can you also share your views of how corporates navigate their scenario from CSR to ESG?
Like we've already discussed, that CSR is a subset of ESG. We did a study, and this was the first study done in India. There is a report on Hurun on which I was one of the judge in terms of finding out India's top 50 companies, listed companies, which are there on the ESG platform, and how are they rated in ESG. Just to share out of experience, it was such a difficult task that everybody amongst us had a hard time asking listed companies for data points. So it is at this point of time so nascent that most of the companies are not maintaining data, one. If the data is maintained, it is not standardized, two. Three, there are different sectors, and there is no one common benchmark which we can relate to. So the most important problem in finance is always the problem of benchmarking. unless we have a benchmark for ESG, it will be very difficult for India as a country, plus finance in India, to imbibe the values as well as profitability mechanisms attached to it to raise money into the country. So these standards, once they are realized, and all of us sitting here, if we are able to make that, bring it to the notice of the government, and do some ISI kind of a standard in terms of raising capital, it will be easier for foreigners to look at us as a capital destination, and it will be easier for us also eventually to raise money within the country.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Neetu. Now, moving, taking this discussion forward with Dr. Suranjali first is directly, jumping to that, can CSR, corporate social responsibility, complement or supplement ESG? This is something, we have a lot of CSR projects in the exhibition also, so it's a very, meaningful discussion. People has asked these questions to me.
Thank you to IICA for inviting me. It's a very timely topic, I'd say. Last year we signed the Net Zero Agreement, the 2017 Net Zero Agreement. Am I audible?
Yeah.
So with the signing of that, a lot has shifted. Not just that we're going to act on climate, but there are going to be displaced communities. There's going to be significant social impact. And therefore, companies will have to do something differently. So, it's not just about profits anymore. All the panelists have already spoken about it, that it's no longer about profits. It's also about what all this company does into the communities and the society. And I think that is a natural relation between CSR as well as ESG reporting. So one of the pillars is S, and if you look back and see how ESG reporting has panned out, the clarity on the S pillar has been very, very thin. Companies as well as regulators, as well as rating agencies and fund managers who are using this information don't know how to interpret S. Now, if you look at the BRSR reporting, in a sense is a step forward because it's asking questions on how you skill your employees, what's the health and safety measures that are sort of provided to your employees, what kind of ecosystem do you have? You have fair wages. Now, these are A, they are more objective, and B, they are related to CSR spends today. So if you look at the bucket of activities that companies undertake predominantly under the CSR, it would be on reskilling employees, or it would be in terms of reaching out to communities for health and for livelihoods. So I would say that there is a natural relationship between CSR and ESG, and I guess with the newer framework, we are now able to neatly tie it in, giving investors as well as other stakeholders a more palpable and objective way to look at both the reporting framework as well as how CSR money is spent.
Dr. Suranjali, can you also mention some trends that are shaping the future of ESG and its drivers?
Yeah, so circling back to where I started, it's essentially, when we all study corporate finance, we look at what are the earnings to the investors. And I think that way of thinking, which is shareholders' perspective of a company, is switching over to a stakeholder's perspective. And it's sort of been the push from the risk side. So I know that Namita said that, look at the opportunity side. But the nudge really came from the risk side to say that if we are saying by 2070, the way we are operating, the way companies are operating is going to change, then any investor's money put into the company, as well as employees, their entire modus operandi is also going to change. And that is, in a sense, been a major push. Now, if today you look at the big fund managers, including BlackRock, they have their own proprietary framework on sustainability, which is extremely interesting because, we always thought that the bottom line was the most interesting part to the investors, but it seemingly isn't anymore. I think some of the trends the speakers have already spoken of, we know that 1,000 listed companies are reporting today in terms of their, responsibility reporting. We've also seen that, in India, there's been an increase in investment in funds which are ESG compliant. And I guess these are trends which are to look out for. The nudge from foreign investors continues. So even today, when a company goes to the market with a green bond, it's met with a lot of enthusiasm as opposed to a corporate bond. For the last couple of decades, we've heard the story of corporate bond market not picking up. But the green bond market getting such a reception means that there is interest from the side of investors saying that we even like debt if it's more responsible. So I would say, in effect, you're seeing an expansion in money. You're seeing also an expansion in thinking on the side of different kinds of investors in the market, as well as companies that are now looking to sort of change their way of operating. So if you look at large cement companies, look at large oil and gas companies that you would think were only thinking or driven by profit, are taking cognizance of the fact that people involved with them are thinking differently. So I guess what we're seeing is, the shift in corporate ideology, or in the way corporate.
So when we say that there is a strong business case, is it a short term or a long term?
That's a very good question. Environment and social responsibility is always long term. And I guess that's why it was always priced out. But the fact that investors are now taking cognizance of it, it's a long term view. Even if you look back at the 2070 target, it looks like a year much, much ahead. But what we can infer from that is that if we don't act now, looking at all the IPCC reports put forward, so if we don't act now, even businesses today that are reporting profits, are paying dividend out to investors, will tomorrow have stranded assets, which in effect will have reverberations across the economy, across the financial system. So I think it's a long-term view with small short-term doses of action across the segment.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Suranjali. Moving directly now to Dr. Sarabjit. I would just like to know your thoughts on this, the overarching umbrella of responsible business, and you being an emergency specialist and disaster risk management. Do you find any connect with disaster risk management and the responsible business agenda?
Thank you. First of all, I'm lending a very important role here. I'm lending gender balance to this team. So yeah, you can clap for me. Yeah. I'm also an outsider in a sense that I work on the development side. I work on the disasters and development agenda. So I'm user of CSR. Yeah, so that's my sort of role. And I have a couple of suggestions today, which I'll make. I will not act as if I'm an expert on ESG. But the sense of urgency which is required to address climate change, I see a lot of sense of urgency in this room, particularly on ESG. And all of you have come together to evaluate, to discuss, and to brainstorm on ESG. I think that sounds exciting to me. And now, how can we kickstart the multiplier effect of ESG? I think that's on my mind. Because the kind of money you guys are talking about is huge. And CSR, it's mind-boggling. So I would propose that there should be a platform approach to working on this, local platforms. And Government of India, Ministry of Panchayati Raj is offering an excellent platform right now. And I would suggest that your ministry and Ministry of Panchayati Raj come together to align their agenda. So right now, Ministry of Panchayati Raj has always had this platform of Gram Panchayat Development Plan. Now they're moving towards localization of SDGs and integrating them in the Gram Panchayat Development Plan. Then they're working with UNICEF, and UNICEF is working with them on making the Gram Panchayat a little more resilient and investing in human settlements resilience of human settlements, resilience of productive sectors, and then with participation of men, women, and children very specifically. So I think if we look at this whole ecosystem approach on this local platform, many of your problems would be sorted quite easily. For example, data. Ministry of Panchayati Raj will be collecting data. And these are plans. These are not reporting. I mean, you guys are involved in reporting, but where are the plans? So I think Ministry of Panchayati Raj can offer you the plans. And there will be data. There will be push for digitization, real-time data collection, and so on and so forth. So a lot of your problems might get resolved, and also we would see some multiplier effect of your work because you will scale down, and then the scale up would happen. So these are some of the thoughts I had. Maybe if you have any more questions, I'll add.
So as a user of CSR, can you throw some light on integrating CSR with ESG?
I doubt I have any expertise on that. But I think since morning I'm hearing about our ancient traditions and so on. So do we have Indian standards? Do we have aspirations to develop Indian standards? And I think we should. As a country, we are representing 1/6 of the world's population. Why not have our own standards? Why not lead the world on where they need to go? And anything that, I mean, India is the one which is going to stop the world, or India is the one which is going to enable the world. I mean, there are no other ways to look at it because we are so many of us, and our carbon footprint is so huge. So I think we should develop our own standards. We should be playing a little more active role. Right now, the way I see your ministry, you've given BRSR framework, etc., etc. But leadership, I think we need more leadership from your ministry, and you've done a great job in last 1 decade. I think some more will be very useful.
Thank you, Dr. Sarabjit. Just two or three max, 2 questions we can take. If there is any question from the audience, any specific comment or remarks? Yes, please. Yeah. Vineet is helping. You are audible, sir. Yeah.
ESG, I think it's causing some confusion also, some overlapping also, whether CSR first or ESG first. So if CSG is a new word, new terminology, then obviously CSR is first and ESG is to follow. Now, if you look at those Schedule 7, I mean, there's many examples with regard to, society. I mean, if we pick up S from the ESG and E also from the environment, there are a lot of things which are there. Whether the environment is the physical environment, or we want to include the business environment also, which is linked with the profitability. There's some overlapping which is there because the budgeting part is also being talked about. So 2% is already there. What's the need for additional budget? So these are some overlappings. I would like to get some concrete answer, as well as there are some suggestions. I would like to know with which official, with which body I should send the list of suggestions that can be incorporated from the future point of view, and also integration of the CSR and ESG.
Yeah.
So maybe it's more of that on those lines. Thank you.
Thank you. To answer your question, as all the panel members, beginning from the chair itself, we highlighted that CSR and ESG are not non-separable. CSR falls under the social element of ESG. So CSR is just a 2% which the companies are or have been doing it now since years as a mandate. But ESG is something more broader than that. there are certain environmental responsibilities, governance, and within social also there are several other things which falls under this ESG. So ESG, the framework is, I can say it's evolving now, and we do have a BRSR which has been mandated by SEBI. So the 1,000 listed companies are reporting based on the BRSR from this financial year. This was the answer to your first question. Second, we would be very happy to take any of your suggestions. IICA being a think tank, we can take the suggestions and we can certainly provide if it needs to be, put it before the ministry as a policy inputs. Thank you. Sir.
See, I think this confusion of CSR, ESG, I'll try to put it into one perspective. This is between the internal and external. CSR is something which you do outside your system, outside your company. ESG is something you internalize for all your operations. Your production process, whether how is it going to impact the society, the environment, is much more than CSR per se. CSR is an altruistic thing from the profit. You are helping the society around you without affecting your processes, the company processes at all. In ESG, you internalize everything. Suppose you're producing something, what is the impact is going to have on environment? How is it affecting society? So that's the crux of the difference I would like to say between CSR and ESG. So ESG is much more broad. It permeates through the entire company. It's not something you do externally. That's how I'll put it in short. But I mean, experts are there. They will have much more differentiated answers which they can give.
Hello.
But as a layman, I will say this is the difference I realize.
So last question, please. Time. Yeah. Yes. Dinesh Agarwal, sir. Please.
Yeah, thank you. When we are talking about ESG, we are talking about the BRSR report.
You're not audible.
When we are talking about the ESG, we are talking about the BRSR report. For me, BRSR report is something like a GRI report. It's not a rating system, whereas ESG is a rating system. And in the rating system, we have seen what happens when the company like Tesla is brought out of the scope of ESG. Now, how it will impact in India, how it will be seen by the companies in India, because it will not be just saying that all the 1,000 companies which are BRSR reporting companies will become or will form a part of the ESG framework, or the mutual fund will be investing in those companies. The issue is that what will be the rating out of the BRSR and how that will impact the Indian companies. If something like Tesla happens, then how it will be dealt with? Will there be any regulation for that?
Yeah, just to answer that, Mr. Agarwal, that the ESG rating agencies needs accreditation from SEBI, and the work is already going on. There is a separate committee also working for that. But when we talk about BRSR, which is based on NGRBC, there are 9 principles. So that is primarily from the disclosures perspective, that at least we should begin from there. And the concept is still evolving, and there's much more work needs to be done, even the sectoral analysis, or even considering the impact on unlisted companies if we make it mandatory, or for SMEs. So there are a lot of things which needs to be worked in the future. So thank you very much. We are running out of time. Next panel members are already waiting. Maybe I can just mention a concluding remark from Namita Vikas.
Thank you very much. I think there's a lot of discussion that we had on CSR and ESG. I think to simply put it, it's 2% versus 98%, or 2% versus 100%, and that's what we need to focus on. That's one. Second is, strengthening the top-down and bottom-up approach. I think that's very, very important. So not just at the grassroots level or at employee level, but also at the board level. How are we even looking at KPIs of the board as far as ESG is concerned? I think that is an important point that we need to take into consideration. Ultimately, all this has to add up, and the adding up is with India's decarbonization commitments of 2070, the SDG commitments that are there, or the NDCs. that India has taken. So it has to add up. So it's like a pyramid, right? And it needs to go into that direction. So that's, I think, a very important factor. And the last factor is ESG, non-financial reporting, disclosures is just the beginning. I mean, disclosures, it's a starting point, right? What you disclose, you measure, and what you measure, you manage. I mean, we've heard this a lot as far as environment was concerned. And so therefore, how do you use ESG as a competitive advantage in terms of capital raising, in terms of your brand, in terms of even competition, getting ahead of competition? I think that's what ESG is all about. CSR is, like we all said, one part of the S, very important. And I mean, it's great that India has this regulation in place because it is mobilizing capital towards that area. And how do you use that CSR capital to create on ground products, experiences, services, so that then you bring that into that 98% mainstream? I think that's very, very important to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. We are running short of time, so we are ending this
Garima,
panel.
Can I ask one
Yes.
question? I mean, these 1,000 big ones are doing mandatory reporting. But can we as a country start supporting some smaller ones?
So that's what I said just now. We are in process of evolving that framework.
The cost of reporting is big, no? So the many of these companies may not be able to pick it up.
That's the next research agenda, which will be coming up from the big players to the small ones. So thank you very much. Very meaningful deliberations and beautifully summed up by Ms. Vikas. May I now request, my colleague, Dr. Lata Suresh, to felicitate the session chair, Ms. Anita Shah, please, with plant. Yeah.
Let me thank you all for this honor.
Requesting my another colleague, Dr. Abha, to please felicitate Ms. Namita Vikas. I request Dr. Naveen Siroi to please felicitate Dr. Sarabji. And my another colleague, Dr. Paila Narayan Rao, please kindly felicitate Ms. Neetu Ahuja. Requesting Dr. Raviraj Atre to please felicitate Dr. Suranjali Tandon. Thank you all the panel members, and certainly you have seen the people who worked behind making this success by all my colleagues. Thank you everyone. I took you for granted and took your name without asking. Apology. Sure.
Thank you so much. And that was an insightful session, isn't it? Let's hear a load of applause for all of them. Please come forward for a good photograph. In the meanwhile, may I request the volunteers to kindly change the dice plate?